Hi guys, welcome to this Geometry Nodes character transformation tutorial. I am Anthony Marinenderi from Talks Animation. Today I am going to share with you how to morph between two different characters using the Geometry Nodes field workflow and how to manipulate the Geometry Nodes using different effects during animation. You will also learn how to animate the character using two different animation rigs, one for the main character and the other for the secondary character. To make this tutorial short, I have added the tutorial files in the description below so we do not have to go and model then rig the characters from scratch. If you are new to this channel, please do subscribe and support the channel as we go on having fun sharing knowledge and experiences and have fun with Blender. So go on now and download the tutorial files and let's get started. Okay guys, at the start, you need to know a few things that you must follow so that your models are well prepared for this transformation. This is the theoretical part of the tutorial, and you don't need to use the files that I have provided for this tutorial. We shall use those ones in the next part of the tutorial. So first, just take a note of what I am going to point out. The first thing you must know is that the two models that you create must have the same statistics. They must have the same number of vertices, edges, faces, triangles, etc. Secondly, the two models must share the same UV map. This way, the materials will be able to transform properly as you are transforming the topology. Now, the best and most effective way to do this is to create your first character, and then duplicate it, and then push, pull, and scale the vertices to make your second character. It's as simple as that. You may also be good at sculpting. If you are good at sculpting, then you might as well just go ahead and sculpt your second model. Okay guys, let's start off by opening a new file and deleting the default cube. Now we can get rid of this collection and then start by appending our main characters. So let's append from these two files, start Caden and start Sheffy. Start Sheffy. Okay. And then append the other character too. Okay, now that we have both characters, we can move here and add a new layout, name it Geo2, like that. Go to Geo2, whatever. Now have a vertical split there so that we can have enough space to work on this side, and then turn this into the geometry node editor. Hit N to get rid of that. Okay, now let's add a plane. This will be the container for the transformation, and let's just call this something like morphing. Okay, let's call it morphing, and then add a new geometry node and let us spin it. Move this down a little bit like that. Add Sheffy right there, and then add Caden. And now that we have these two characters there, we can hide these two. We can hide the original characters. Now, the first thing we want to do is to capture the attributes of one of the characters. We are going to start with Sheffy here. So let's add a capture attribute like that. Then let's add a set position node. Okay. Turn this into vector and leave that as point. Connect this, the object info, into the capture attribute, and then connect the capture attribute into the geometry. Then you can delete the group output right now, and as you can see, our plane disappears because now there is no group input. And then come here and connect the geometry to the group output, and now we can see that Sheffy is our main character. Okay, now we need to transfer the attributes of this model, okay, the object info from this one to this one. So what we're going to do here is start off with a transfer attribute. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit so that everything is clear, and then add a position node like that. Now turn this transfer attribute into vector index and leave that as point. Now connect this there, connect the geometry to the source, and then connect this other position to the attribute. Okay, now let's create a little bit of space here. We are going to need it much later. Right now and much later we are going to need some space there. Let's now add something called mix RGB right there, and add that attribute to color 2, add the first attribute to color 1, and then have this mix of attributes controlling the position of the group output. And now as you can see, when I move this to 1, we have one character. When I move it to 0, we have the other character. Okay, now we can't keep doing this. We can't come here and keep moving this from 0 to 1, 0 to 1. So we need to add a controller that will drive the transformation for us. Okay, so let's come back here and let us add an empty. Okay, let's add an empty just like that. Then drag this. Okay, let's rename this into TRDRV, transform driver. Okay, you can name it whatever you want, something that is relevant to you, something that you can quickly remember. So let's put this here. Now we want the position, or rather the location of this object to drive the transformation. Okay, when you move this, the transformation should occur. So what we're going to do is add a position node. Then we add a vector math node like that, connect this to the top, and then the location of the empty of the TRDRV, the transform driver, should affect the transformation here. Now in this case, we also want the scale of the TR driver to affect the transformation too. So let us add another vector math. Okay, and oops, sorry, make sure you set this to subtract before I go on and mess up everything before we start doing anything wonderful. And then change this to divide, connect this vector there, and then connect the scale of the empty to that. Now let's just move this a little bit backwards there. Okay, now we want to assign one direction that will change, the transformation will change in a particular direction. Now you can set any direction, it will work. But for now, what we are going to do is we are just going to use the z-axis. So let us add a separate XYZ and connect that to that. And now connect the z-axis to the factor. Okay, all right. And now as you can see, when we move this in the z-axis, we have our transformation. Quite cool, right? Now you have your transformation, but the transformation looks a little bit too boring. So we are going to add a little more fun to it. So what we are going to do here is come here and move this a little bit outwards, duplicate this set position, bring it there, And then what we want to do is, kind of like have the transformation have a little bump, that cartoonish bump when someone is transforming into a different character. There's that kind of swelling and, that very interesting kind of motion. So what we need to do is to offset the geometry along the normal of the faces. Okay? So we are going to offset the geometry along the normals of the faces. But as you can see, something very strange has happened here. Everything has just ballooned and gone crazy. So what we are going to do here is we are going to add a vector math. And then we are going to set this to scale. Okay. We are going to set that to scale, and then we are going to leave this at 1. Just like that. Now what we want to do is connect this scale right there. And whoops, everything seems to be getting even worse than it was before. But not to worry. We're going to fix that in a little while right now. Let us add a float curve. This will help define the way the transformation will bump. So adding the float curve, as you can see, things have come a little bit smaller, but what we're going to do is pull this down. Okay. And then to add that little bump, what we're going to do is make sure that there's a little bump in the float curve. So let's just pull that up a little bit, then pull this down a little bit, and pull this down a little bit. Okay. We can be exact if we want. We can put this at 0.25 and this at 0.02. This second one, we can make it at 0.5 and make this 0.04. And then this can be set at 0.75. And this back again to 0.02. Okay. Now, as you can see, if I move this, there is an interesting bump that is coming in. The model seems to swell as the transformation is taking place. Okay. Now we can add another extra bump so that it looks like, when you hit water, it kind of like the ripple keeps on going on. So we can just make it go on like one more time. So let us first group this. Hit Control G to group it, and then move out, and then come here, hit F2, and rename this to Bounce 01. Okay. Good. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. After naming it Bounce 01, duplicate it, add it there. And then don't forget this to make this a single user. We want to edit this and we want to work with this, and we don't want it to affect the original one. So hit F2 again and just call it, no, select that, hit F2 and then call it Bounce 02. Okay. Now what we are going to do is reconnect this right there. So we have the second bounce, and then because we want it, at this moment, the two bounces are just mapped on top of each other, as you can see. Okay, they are mapped on top of each other. So we can either delay this, to happen after this, or advance it. So what we can do here is just add a simple math node. Okay. And then make this either add or subtract depending on what you want to do. If you want it to go ahead, if you want this second one to go ahead, then leave it at add. If you want it to come after this one, then you leave it at subtract. And then we can put this value at something like 0.75 or 0.8, 0.9, depending on how much delay you want. And then now you can see we have two bounces. There is one that goes ahead. If you can just move this slowly, you can see one goes ahead and then the other one comes after. If we change this to add, the same thing happens. After the transformation passes, there is a bounce that follows after. So you can see it's going boing, 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 and that's it. You are done. Now, we had talked about the scale. Here we talked about the scale. The location is pretty straightforward. It goes up and down. What about the scale? How does it affect this? So let us see. This is at scale 1. If I change this to 0.2, already you can see there's been a considerable change in the way the transformation happens. So if I grab this along the z-axis, you can see when it is at 0.2, there's a completely different transformation. Okay, the transformation looks a lot different. So maybe you just want to show the transformation along the finger and you don't want it to be too big, then you can just scale the driver for something else. You can leave this at 1 and you can see the transformation is a lot different. I personally decided to just leave it at 0.5. So it's really up to you. What kind of transformation do you want to have? It's really up to you. So with that, we are done with the transform part of this tutorial. Now we need to move in and let us see. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If we come here and we enable the materials, you will see that the materials are not transforming. Okay, the character seems to be using one material alone. Okay, let me just for this time, let me just constrain it along the z-axis so that we can have better control. So you see, they are just the character just has one material. So this is the reason why I was talking about the UV map. The UV map must be the same so that we can be able to map the material of the first character onto the second character without having any problems. So let's see how we get to do that. Okay, now let's add another layout. I like working with big spaces and I find this very comfortable for me, especially when working with nodes. So let's have a vertical split here. We can call this mat 2. Okay, and then turn this into the shader editor and hit N. Now if we can okay, there we go. Now what are we going to do here to have these materials work in the proper manner? Now what we are going to do first of all is something kind of weird. We are going to come here, select our models and delete their materials. You might be saying, no, why are we doing that? We are doing that because we need to be able to assign a new material to our morphed character, to our morphing character. We add a new material that will allow us to see the changes. Right now, if we were going to use the original materials, we would not be able to assign a new material and see the changes. Okay? Well, we probably would, but I don't want to complicate things. Let's just make things a little bit easier for everybody. So let me add a new material. Let's call this a mat. Whatever you want to call it. Anything that works for you. So now we have mat. Before we proceed further, let's come down to the geometry nodes here. And just after bounce 2, create a little more space. Just after bounce 2, let's add a set material. Okay, and then we choose mat as the new material. Now let's go back to mat. Spread this out a little bit like that. Okay, and let's add a mix shader plug it in there. And then we can duplicate this, hit Shift D, duplicate the principal shader, and plug it into the second slot. Now we need to know which color represents which character. So what we're going to do here is just pick two random colors. Make this what? Green, and this one purple. Okay. Now what we need to know, as you can see, if I do that, it goes to purple. If I do that, it goes to green. So we need to have an object that will also drive this color. So let's first bring that there. Let's add a color ramp. Okay. Let's add a color ramp and set this to constant. And then let's add a gradient texture. Plug in the factor to the factor. No, let's add the color to the factor, sorry. Let's plug in the color to the factor. And then come here and hit Ctrl T and set this to object. Okay, now which object are we going to use in this case? Well, we are going to add a new empty. We are going to add a new empty to the scene. So Shift A, add an empty, and I would prefer to have one that has the arrows showing us the direction of the axis, and you will see why a little bit later. Let's call this matte DRV, material driver. Okay. Now with the matte DRV, let's pin this so that it stops disappearing. What we are going to do now is pick this object and select our matte DRV. Okay, select the matte DRV there. So if I grab this, oh yes, we have not yet connected these two. Connect the color to the factor. And now you can see oh, there's something I've not done here, silly me. Make sure that this is at position 0.5. Okay, make it position 0.5, and now you can see as you move this, the color changes. But as you can see, the change is only happening in the X direction. So if we want it to happen up and down, what we need to do is turn this X upside down. So all you have to do is come here and set the rotation to 90. And now it moves up and down. Now what we need to do here is bring in our transform driver, select that, and select the transform driver, and then make it the parent. So now when you select our transform driver and move it up and down, the material will change, just like that. Once again, the scale should be the same. So let's make it 0.5 so that we have a much cleaner transformation. As you can see now, the material moves much closer to the transformation. I mean, if I selected this and moved it up, you can see now the material moves much closer to the transformation, even though not accurate. If you want it even to be better, scale it down a little more. So let's make this like 0.1. We know it is parented to the main transform driver. And now if we move this, you can see it is quite accurate. You can even make it smaller if you want more control, but we are going to overcome that in a little while. So what are we going to do now? What we're going to do is to come here and we add a mix RGB node. Okay, then What we're going to do is add a mask grave texture. Okay, before we connect it anywhere, let us move this up to the middle so that we can see the transformation here, how it is going to be affected by the mask grave texture. So let's add that, and you can see already we have a little more variety coming in. Then we can play around with the values here, like the scale. As you can see, as I change, everything changes, and the detail. Okay, can add more detail, play around with the dimension. For example, the smaller it is, the rougher, the more roughness you will have towards the edges, and the lacquerarity, you know. We're just trying to make the transformation a little bit more interesting here, at the edges. And now with that, if we just move this, you can see the kind of transformation that we have. Okay, and the scale of the matte driver will also affect this transformation. So if we make it like 0.5, you can see what happens there. And then you can come here and you can play around with the dimensions and the clarity and well, the scale and that sort of stuff. And now you can see it even looks a bit more interesting. So if I get the transform driver and move it up and down, you can see the way the material kind of tends to just bleed in a very, very interesting manner. Now, we can now group this so that we can get it out of the way. Hit Ctrl G, then move out, and then create some space here, because we are going to need a lot of space to add the textures to these two materials. Now, what we can see is that when we move this down, we have green as the color for Kden, and that is why I needed to remove the original colors from the original materials from the original models. Green seems to be the color for Kden, and when we move this up, purple is the color for the Chevy character. So with that said, what we'll do now is just create some space. It doesn't matter how much space, as long as it is within that's the beauty of the geometry nodes. As long as it is within the window, everything will work perfectly. Now, hit Shift Control T, go into pictures, and let's get Hayden. Let's use this. I'd prefer that. Let's go with T2. Let's select T2 Kden. Okay. T2 Kden, leave T1. T2 Kden, T1 is for a different object, is for the first Kden, is for T1 Kden. This is T2 Kden. So add that texture set, and boom, we have our Kden character. Now, we need to remove this displacement, and just leave it hanging there. It doesn't matter because we already have a normal map here. We don't need the displacement map right now. Perhaps you can use it to affect the strength if you want to, or you can leave it that way. You can just connect it to the strength, and that is it. Now that we have set that first material, can come here now and doing the same thing, Shift Control T, and let's choose T2 Chevy, all those materials, enter the principal texture set, and once more, let's remove the displacement from there. And well, like I said, you can leave it that way, or you can just connect it to the string. It really won't matter so much. It won't matter that much. And there we go. Now, if we move this, you can see that the material transforms from one character to the other accurately, and that is all you need. That brings us to the end of the morphing and material part of this tutorial. We are now going to move and see how to work with these geometry nodes when you are animating a character. Okay, when you're animating your morph character. Thank you. Let's move on to the next part of the tutorial. Okay, in this part, we are going to see how we can manipulate the geometry nodes, geometry nodes to add more variations when it comes to our characters. So we are going to pick this Caden ladder, and I'm going to add another layout here and give it a vertical split. Turn this to the geometry nodes editor, select that so that we can now see the geometry nodes and pin it. Okay, let's get rid of this panel. So we have our geometry nodes there, just like we had done in the first case. Let me just get rid of this environment. Okay, and turn this back on there so that we can see the materials a bit better. Now, what if, as you can see, this transformation is turning from Caden to Lado from the bottom up. Okay, so what if I wanted this to turn from Lado to Caden from the bottom up? How would we go about this? Well, it is quite simple. All you would need to do is come to this point, disconnect that, then switch this to this. Okay? And now you can see, yes, you do have the character turning from Lado to Caden, but the materials are all wrong. So how are you going to set that up? How are you going to correct that? All you need to do is select the material control, which I can find here. I called it Rangi in this case. And as you can see, the X axis is facing down. So all you need to do is flip it over. -90. And the materials are switched back automatically to their correct characters. Now, in this case, I had two geometry nodes setups, one for the body and one for the eyes. I did this to ensure that you can have you can have a character with many different parts, and all of them would have to have the same hierarchy and the same geometry nodes applied to them. So I also did this separately for the eyes. So if we have done that for the original, we're going to unpin this so that we can get the eyes, and you're just going to have to do the same thing, switch this down, switch this back to the top, and now we have the correct eyes. Before, you could see that the smaller eyes, Lado's eyes were in Caden, and Caden was having Lado's eyes. So now we can now transform Lado to Caden from the bottom up. Okay, now what if I wanted this transformation to occur in a different axis? How would I go about that? Simple. You come here, say we want it to move from the left to the right. Okay, all you need to do is, in this case, we are constraining the motion to the z-axis. All you have to do is come and switch 1, 2, and 3. These 3 connections from z to y, so, or to x. So let's put that there. Take the x, put it in that value, and then disconnect this and take the X and put it in that value. And now what happens is that if we select this and we let it move in the X-axis direction, the transformation now moves from the left to the right. But once again, you can see the material is not transforming. If you move it from left to right from up there, the materials still stay the same. If you move this, if you move the controller, let me just release all that. If you move the controller down and you move from the left to the right, once again, the materials are all messed up. So what are you going to do? Once again, you have to remember X-axis is the direction that the material is changing. So depending on who's your main character and who is your secondary character, you can now take this to 0, perhaps. And let's check that out, see if that is the correct way. Okay. And there we go. One thing still, as you can see, the eyes are not working properly. So we have to come back to the eyes, which are still transforming in the Z direction, and do the same thing that we did by changing all this to the X direction. And now our character, let's get rid of that, let's create some more space here, and now our character will transform from the left to the right. Okay, it's as simple as that. And the same thing applies if you want to transform your character from the front to the back, that is in the Y direction. All you have to do is to go to the geometry nodes and change this to the X to the Y, and do the same thing for the materials. And that is how you can manipulate your geometry nodes for different kinds of effects. You want Cadent to transform from the bottom upwards, from the top downwards, from the left to the right, from the front to the back. All you have to do is change what happens at this point in the separate XYZ, and also in the object info, which is the primary and which is the secondary character. I hope you understand that. Okay. Okay guys, in the tutorial files you'll find the Cadent Lado file, and in this file you can see I've already set up the geometry system. It's already prepared, and we are now going to go into how to animate these characters so that the two rigs operate as one. So for now what we're going to do is we're just going to hide the environment, and then so that we can work on Cadent and Lado. Now I have imported the two characters as separate collections, so that we have Cadent master. If I'm to hide this morphing tutorial, we have Cadent master. You can see he has his own rig. Okay, he has his own rig, and if we come to the Lado master, let's turn this on. You can see that he also has his own rig here. Now when you want to animate the two characters, what you need to know is that it is possible to share one action between two different rigs, and that is exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to create a small, very simple animation really. nothing complex at this time. So what we're going to do is come down here to frame 1. Let's go to frame 1 and move this hand down. Let's add the auto keying. Let's activate the auto keying, and we're just going to create a small, very simple kind of a wave. I like animating using the local coordinates, and then I can turn on this gimbal, and then right now we are not concerned with the timing. We just want the actions. So let's move forward like 10 frames and grab this. I just want a simple waving animation. Really simple. Let's move another 10 frames. Let's rotate this way. Let's move another 10 frames. Rotate it that way. Move another 10 frames. And let's just go to the original pose. Copy that pose. Come to frame 40 and let's paste the pose. Just like that. It's really just a simple for illustration purposes, really. It's nothing too fancy. But let's just try and make it a little bit more realistic. And okay, let's grab this a little bit. Let's make the whole thing come to around 1 second. I usually animate using 30 frames per second. So what I want him to do is to repeat this motion a number of times so that we can be able to animate the the driver for the transformation, and then we see just what we are going to get out of it. So what we'll do is select these keys here and duplicate them. Bring this to 40. Duplicate 70. Duplicate right. I think that should be enough. So what we want to do is for him to wave twice, and then at this point between frame 60 and 70 we want it to go up, wave twice, and then between frame 120 and 130 we want the transformation to go back to its original point. So between frame 60 and 70. Okay. So let's hide this. If we come to animation, let's first, it's called cadence rig action. Let's just call this wave. And let's give it, I always do that so that I don't lose my animations by giving it a fake user. All right. Okay, let's hide this, and we come back to the morphing, and you will notice something very interesting right here. Let's first take this down at between frame 60. Let's go to frame 60. We said frame 60. Let's bring this down, and as you can see, the two models have different poses. But let's first work on this. Let's add a keyframe there, and then at frame 70, bring this to the top, like that. And we said between frame 140 and 150. Let's see that the whole animation, if I'm not wrong, between frame 130, let's turn him back between frame 130 and 140. This is just for demonstration purposes. It isn't really accurate. So frame 130, we're going to insert available. We're going to select that and insert available. And then frame 140, we're just going to drag it back down to the bottom. Okay. Good. Now, what are we going to do about Lado? Because as you can see, it only seems to work when Kden is the main character. So what are we going to do? What we're going to do is simply come here. Let's hide that first. Then grab this, come here in the action editor, and simply select the wave action. Okay? Assign the wave action. And now you can see oh my god. And now you can see that Lado 2 has the same action. But now look at this. His hand is getting buried in his body. That is not what we want. So what are we going to do? Okay. These two are using the same animation basically. They're using the wave animation. So it doesn't matter whether you're going to edit the animation using the Cadence rig, or you're going to use Lado's rig. All you're going to do is know that they're both using the same action. So go into pose mode, and now it's time for us to tweak this so that we don't have the hand sinking into his body. So let's go back to where the transformation takes place. Let's go back. We shouldn't be using this. We should be using this. Sorry about that. Let's go back and activate both Lados and the morph so that you can see both. And what we need to know is where is the transformation taking place. Okay, so from frame 70, up to about frame 140. Let's now come and edit this. When the hand comes down at this point, frame 90, at frame 90 we can pull out the hand and basically that's it. Pull out the hand, continue, and once again at this point copy the pose there, and at frame 120 let's paste the pose. So now it doesn't really matter whether the hand smashes in here, because at this point when we go to the morph animation we are still working with Cadence rig. But now you can see as it moves there, the hand is no longer sinking into the body. Okay, the hand is no longer sinking into the body. So that's how you get the two rigs to work together. You have to do the animation in one rig, create and name the action, and then go back and tweak for the second character and make sure that you don't have parts of the body just smashing into, or part of the topology just, going through in an unnatural way. That's it. We can also come and tweak the arm here, but I'm not going to go into all that because I guess you already get the gist of what you need to do to make sure that the two objects can share the same animation. And now you can see, let us look at it from this point, and there you can see. There we go. That is how you get the two rigs to work together. Now there's one little thing that I would like to point out, and let me illustrate that by using one of the files that I used in my promotion video. Okay, in this part of the tutorial, we are going to talk about what happens when you are animating with constraints. This is the scene where Lado seems to be very annoyed. Caden seems to be annoyed with the donut for turning him into some funny form of himself, and he really wants to destroy the donut. So he goes up and smashes the donut. But even after smashing the donut, it still somehow turns him back into the fat Lado that he does not like, and then he comes and falls down, and that's it. So he comes, bang, and then he turns into some strange creature. Well, for this animation to work properly, what I did was let me get rid of this. Okay, now that we have a clearer view, we can now see that what I did in this case, to make it easy, let me get rid of this, to make it easy to animate the whole scene, was I added bones to the armature. I added 3 more bones to the armature. This was to control the mallet, okay? So that all I had to do was to animate this bone. And then to keep the hands in the proper place, I added these 2 bones and parented them to the main bone here. Hammer control left, and you see this kind of like controlled the position of the hand, of the left hand, and this one controlled the position of the right hand. This is a way that this is a very good way to make sure that you animate your character without having a lot of slipping, the hands kind of sliding all over the place. By animating the hammer and constraining the hands to one position in the hammer, then they only slide at certain points when he's preparing to smash down. You see, at this point the hands change, okay, and then he comes down and smashes down, okay, and then I animated the smash going through the body, and then I, like we had seen before, just copied the action to the Lado, to the Lado character. However, what I wanted to point out is when you're working with constraints, you must make sure that the constraints, since the constraints were added to the first character, you must also come here to the constraint button and make sure that they have the same, you have added the same constraint here. Otherwise, it will not work. For example, if I hide this, you can see what happens. And if you now come down to the morphing animation, at the point where you get the character changing into Lado, look what happens to the hand. This is what happens. Once the transformation begins, the hand tears off because you have not added the constraint to the second character. So you have to make sure that you select this rig, and you can see if I also disable that, that's what would happen. But now when you enable the transformations, everything works. And you must make sure that the transformation must be on the constraint. The target constraint must be on the Kden rig, because the extra bones that I added the extra bones not to the Lado rig, but to the Kden rig. Okay? I added them to the Kden rig. This must be the same transformation. So all you have to do is just copy the transform and then paste the transform on the corresponding bone on the corresponding controller on the other rig, and your animation, when you're working with constraints, your animation will work perfectly. That's just something else that I needed to point out at this time. Thank you. This brings us to the end of this Geometry Nodes tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do subscribe to the channel and we can continue having fun with Blender. Happy blending time, guys!